Massie names 20 Epstein clients. 67 seconds later, Patel's no names lie destroyed career. The moment the words left his mouth, the entire hearing room shifted. It wasn't the typical political theater, not the usual back and forth that fades once the cameras stop rolling. This was something else, an irreversible collision between documented evidence, institutional denial, and a single question that shattered the facade the FBI director had spent months defending. What unfolded in those 67 seconds didn't just expose inconsistencies.
Gentleman, yes, back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I've got 4 documents I'd like to introduce into the record. The first one is Jeffrey Epstein's 6 story played out for years in plain sight. And Acosta is quoted in here saying, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." The second document is entitled, "What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections." The third document is from Fox Digital. It's titled, "Epstein's Private Calendar Reveals Planned Meetings with Obama Admin Official CIA Chief." And the last document is Wall Street Journal article that highlights Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the former Prime Minister of Israel and head of military intelligence for Israel. It may have held that title when he met Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, "You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself?" You replied, according to the transcript, "There is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else." You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information, and we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file. And I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Gentleman
consent
yields back.
request.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce an unsigned memorandum from July 7, 2025 that says we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties with the insignia of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Without objection.
It revealed the kind of systemic rot people whisper about online, but never expect to see confirmed on live television. Everything began in a setting that should have been predictable, the Rayburn House office building, just after 10:47 a.m., where hearings tend to drag for hours and very little usually changes. Thomas Massie, the quiet engineer-turned-congressman, walked up to the microphone with 4 plain manila folders. Nothing about them looked remarkable, no bold stamps, no dramatic markings. Just simple folders containing facts the FBI had spent 6 years burying under layers of procedure, classification, and bureaucratic excuses. But when Massie opened them, those folders turned into a countdown clock that nobody in the chamber realized had already begun ticking. That FBI Director Kash Patel entered that hearing confident he had survived the worst of the storm. He'd taken blows the day before in the Senate, long, grinding hours about immigration numbers, internal misconduct, and uncomfortable questions about buried files. Through all of it, he presented himself as the unshakable steady hand. But the danger that morning wasn't coming from across the aisle. It was coming from a Republican who cared more about truth than party loyalty. In Washington, that makes someone far more unpredictable and far more dangerous. Massie wasn't bluffing. He never had been. Every reporter in the room noticed the shift when he mentioned exactly what he brought. Files documenting intelligence links, suppressed warnings, private schedules, and hundreds of thousands of pages of internal interview records. Records containing the names the FBI insisted did not exist. That was the first crack. The chamber wasn't just listening. They were bracing themselves. He started by laying out a foundation nobody expected him to touch. The public had heard rumors for years about intelligence ties surrounding Epstein, but rarely did anyone with a government badge acknowledge it. Yet here was a congressman methodically showing that the whispers weren't coming from thin air. They were documented in federal records, discussions about intelligence relationships, private meetings with high-ranking officials, and decades of unexplored connections across multiple governments. That IT wasn't presented as speculation or as online gossip. It was presented as verifiable paperwork that had sat for years in government archives while the public was told there was nothing meaningful left to uncover. Massie didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid out a chilling puzzle that the FBI had never addressed. A man with access to classified circles, with a network of extremely powerful associates, operating for years without meaningful intervention. And the room understood exactly what that implied. But the real shock arrived when Massie shifted toward the documents almost no one had seen, the FD 302s. These are the internal FBI summaries where victims describe the men they said had been involved. Not rumored names. Not internet speculation. Names given directly to federal agents by survivors who participated in official interviews. For years, the public was told those interviews produced little, that accusations were too vague or too unverified to justify wider action. But the paperwork Massie referenced told a very different story. According to those victims, there were 20 men, 20 individuals who allegedly participated or benefited from Epstein's pipeline. Their identities weren't listed in the hearing, but the categories alone were enough to ignite immediate global speculation. A royal figure, a Hollywood powerhouse with deep industry ties, a prominent banker, a government official with extended international connections, a music industry name with decades of influence, a billionaire from Canada with a long history of global deals, a well-known performer whose craft relied on illusion, several moguls whose wealth came from industries everyone recognized. Massie didn't present these categories as confirmed guilt. He framed them exactly as the documents described. Unproven claims recorded by the FBI, documented testimonies waiting for investigation, and allegations the Bureau had quietly archived without closure. The key was not that the names existed. It was that the FBI director had insisted no meaningful list existed at all. When Massie asked whether Patel had personally reviewed the FD 302s, the room froze. It wasn't just tension. It was the realization that the director's next sentence would determine whether he had misled Congress or whether he had failed to examine the most explosive evidence in his own possession. And after a painful, breath-holding silence, Patel admitted he hadn't read them all in that instant. Everything collapsed. The admission was worse than a contradiction. It showed the FBI's top official had made sweeping public claims without reviewing the documents those claims were based on. Victims had spent years recounting trauma in interviews they believed mattered. Agents had filed reports that were archived, not analyzed. Administrations had changed, but the lack of follow-through remained identical every time. The director's credibility didn't just crack. It imploded. Massie pressed the reality that everyone watching had already pieced together. How could someone insist no names existed when he hadn't personally examined the records containing them? How could the Bureau claim no substantial leads when the summaries spelled out allegations detailed enough for a full investigative team to pursue? And how could the director defend a system that had clearly decided the optics of a complete investigation were too dangerous to handle? Things became even worse for Patel when Massie pointed out that the director had attended carefully orchestrated meetings with online personalities at the White House, people whose content would benefit from dramatic revelations, yet had not committed to meeting the victims themselves. To the public, that moment wasn't political. It was moral. Survivors who had already spent years waiting for closure were discovering that the FBI director found time for influencers, but not for them. And then Massie took the hearing into territory most members of Congress avoid entirely: the CIA question. The room tightened instantly. Very rarely does anyone publicly acknowledge the possibility that Epstein's activities crossed into intelligence channels. Yet Massie asked directly whether the FBI had reviewed any CIA-related files or if such files even existed. Patel's answer, layered in conditional language, sparked immediate speculation. If the nation's chief law enforcement officer couldn't confirm what files existed or whether he had seen them, what did that suggest about transparency inside federal agencies? His response revealed more through what it avoided than what it clarified. He didn't say he had seen the files. He didn't say they didn't exist. He didn't say the CIA had cooperated fully. Instead, every part of his answer was built on possibilities, not certainties, and that only widened the distrust. Within hours, social media erupted, not with conspiracy theories, but with analysis. Millions of people dissected the categories of individuals mentioned: the bureaucratic hedging, the realization that the director in charge of the most sensitive domestic investigations had testified about evidence he never reviewed. Even people who normally defend federal institutions couldn't rationalize what they had just witnessed. Former prosecutors called it a catastrophic breach of duty. Commentators on every major network questioned how a bureaucracy could operate on assumptions instead of facts. And inside the FBI, whistleblowers began to speak. They described the Epstein case as career-ending, a subject that supervisors warned agents to avoid, and a file that nobody wanted responsibility for because it reached into elite networks too sensitive to challenge. The fallout didn't stop. Victim advocacy groups came forward, expressing not just anger but deep emotional betrayal. Survivors had trusted the system. They relived traumatic experiences because they believed their voices mattered, only to learn the director overseeing their cases hadn't given their testimonies the attention he gave public appearances and political negotiations. By October, the structure holding Patel's position together was gone. It wasn't one scandal. It wasn't one mistake. It was the accumulation of contradictions, evasions, and now a moment captured on camera that showed the entire country that the person leading the bureau had spoken confidently about evidence he never personally examined. But the historical significance of that 67-second exchange wasn't just Patel's unraveling. It was Massie's demonstration that, even in an era dominated by political performance, factual pressure still has power. He didn't yell. He didn't grandstand. He simply used documented information and direct questioning to expose a hidden institutional failure. The lesson was unmistakable. Complex evasions fall apart when confronted by simple, undeniable facts. Bureaucratic shields don't hold up when someone asks a question that requires a real answer instead of a rehearsed talking point. And the public's trust in federal law enforcement isn't damaged by transparency. It's damaged by discovering that transparency never existed in the first place. The most important part of this story wasn't the viral clip, or the global speculation, or the political consequences. It was the revelation that an entire set of testimonies, given by people who had waited years for justice, had gone unreviewed by the very leadership entrusted to act on them. Those voices had been placed in files, not in action. Massie didn't expose a nameless cover-up. He exposed something deeper. A culture of avoidance, of career fear, of unwillingness to confront powerful networks that could create fallout too great for any agency to handle. The director lost his credibility. The institution lost public trust. But the victims lost something much more painful: the belief that the system ever intended to help them at all. And yet, Massie's intervention changed the trajectory. It forced conversations that had been deflected for years. It brought forward whistleblowers. It stripped away the carefully constructed protective layers that shielded the case from real scrutiny. It created momentum for a renewed investigation that no administration could ignore without facing severe political consequences. The hearing proved that sometimes the most devastating blow isn't uncovering new secrets. It's proving the people in charge never bothered to look. And it all began with a single question asked at the right moment by someone who refused to let the truth be buried under bureaucracy. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dive investigations, and hit the bell so you never miss the stories others avoid. Your support helps bring hidden truths into the light, one question at a time.